Dear students, I hope you are all well and enjoying in your home and studying also. So, as you know, last week we just completed our third chapter, The Flower, in which we discussed about the structure of flower and its inflorescence. Today, we just go through some key points to remember and key terms in which you have to focus something. So first of all, flower. What is a flower? If we remember about that, flower is a highly modified shoot in which nodes and internodes are very much condensed to form a thalamus or receptacle. Okay, what are nodes and internodes? You easily understand. Suppose this is a structure of stem of a flower, and branches which bear flower are comes in nodes, and the space between two branches is known as internodes. Okay, the flower is a mainly modified shoot. The flower may be terminal or axial. Four holes of the flower appendix are present on the thalamus of a complete flower, as we already discussed about that. Okay, four holes are, you just remember that these are the holes which are calyx, corolla, androcium and gynoecium, and androcium and gynoecium are essential holes. Okay, and they are, first two are accessory. So these are some condition. Gamosepalous means when sepals are fused, and polypsepalous when the sepals are free. So these are some normal things which you can easily understand, because we already discussed in chapter with detail. And depending upon the position of the floral holes with regards to ovary, it can be hypogynous when flower originate from below the ovary, and perigynous when flower originate from the or evolve from the parallel to the ovary, or epigynous means when floral parts arise from the above of the ovary. Suppose this is a structure of ovary, and if floral parts are arise below from that there. Okay, so it is a hypogynous. And when floral parts are arise from just side by side from the ovary, this is the example of perigynous. And when floral parts are above from ovary, suppose, sorry, this is a ovary, and floral parts arise from above from the ovary, so this is a epigynous condition. Placenta inflorescence, we already discussed about that. And the smallest flower are found in Wolfia ariza. The largest flower is Rafflesia, and the longest inflorescence found in the agave. Some key terms are also given on your book, that is a climatic condition, because this condition occur when naked flower without sepal and petals are found in any plant. Okay, it means flower have no sepal and petals. Deciduous, sepal that fall off on the maturation of flower, and is formation of fruit. Okay, when fruit is formed, sepal will be fall. So this condition is known as deciduous. And diadelphous, when the filaments of stamens are fused in two bundles. It means example is given of pea. And dioecious, plants bearing either male or the female flower. Only single flower are found. Okay. Epigynous, ovary occupies the lowest position on the thalamus, and the other holes are present above the ovary. As we just remember now, thalamus is fused with the wall of ovary. Epipetalous, when the stamens are fused with petals. Okay, when stamens are fused with petals, this condition is known as epipetalous condition. Gynandrous, when the stamens are fused with the carpels or gynoecium, either wholly or by their anthers only. Example are Calotropis. Hypogonous, when the ovary is present at the highest position on the thalamus and all other holes are present below the ovary. Okay, monoidelphous condition, it is the condition in which filaments of all the stamens fuse, forming a tube-like structure around gynoecium. Okay, these are the main key points you can also note in your notebook. Monoecious condition, plants bearing both male and female flowers. Example are maize. Mainly the monocotyledons like family, grass family, in which wheat and other monocotyledons are found. They show the condition of monoecious plants. Neutrous flower, in which both androecium and gynoecium are absent. Ray florets of sunflower are the example. And pedicel, stalk of the flower with which it is attached to the stem. Perianth, undifferentiated calyx and corolla. We already discussed about placentation. Pistillate condition, a flower having gynoecium only, stamens either absent or non-functional, that is found in cucurbites. And pistilloid, non-functional pistil, staminate flowers having only stamens. Examples are maize and mulberry. Staminoids, non-functional stamens. Synangesius condition is when anthers of the stamens are absent but filaments are free. They are fused. Okay, synangesius condition, anthers are fused but filaments are free. Tepals, undifferentiated sepal or petals. Thalamus, condensed shoot having nodes and internodes bearing floral appendages. Now you have to complete the question and answers also of this topic. If you have any confusion in understanding some terms, as I think whole things is given on your course book, but still if you find any confusion in any question, you can ask me. So I also share a video with you in which floral parts and floral structures you can easily understand these terms. So must watch. Thank you.
Let's talk about the different parts of the carpel and the stamen, and we'll see how to remember them as well. So in a previous video, we spoke about the 4 major parts of the flower, and we also saw what they do. We also saw unisexual and bisexual flowers. If you need more details on that, you can go back and check out our video on flowers, unisexual and bisexual. Okay. So over here, let's only focus on the reproductive parts, the carpel and the stamen. So let me get rid of these others. All right, so let's start with the stamen. What are the different parts of the stamen that we can identify? So stamen can have 2 major parts. So the part below over here, which is like kind of like a wire, we call that the filament. This is the filament. And that the part on top of that, kind of like the head of the stamen, we call that the anther. Anther. And guess what? Anther produces something called the pollen grains. You may have heard of this. Pollen grains. These dotted things that I've drawn over here that you may be able to see, they are what pollen grains are. Sometimes these pollen grains, some flowers have these pollen grains to be very sticky. In such cases, when you touch them, they will stick to your hand, right? And it's inside these pollen grains where you will find the sperm cells. So the sperm cells of the flower are found inside the pollen grains. All right, let's do the female parts now. The female reproductive part, the carpel or the pistil, they can be further divided into 3 major parts. So the topmost part is called the stigma. The part below, it's a long structure over here, it's called the style. And this structure over here is what we call the ovary. It's inside the ovaries you'll find these structures over here, which you can see, these seed-like structures. They're not seeds yet, but these seed-like structures, they are called ovules. And guess what? It's inside these ovules you will find the egg cells. All right, so again, let me just write that over here. The egg cells are found inside these ovules. So if you have more than one ovules, if a flower has more than one ovules, as you can see over here, each ovule will have an egg cell. And so you can kind of see now how far away the sperm cells are from the egg cells. For reproduction to happen, they have to fuse. And so one of the first steps of reproduction is the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther onto the stigma. And from there, the sperms will have to find a way to reach the sperm cells, the egg cells. But of course, that's going to happen in the future videos. This transfer is what we call the pollination, right? And we'll see in the future videos how bees and other insects play an important role in this pollination feature. Anyways, these are the important parts of the stamen and the carpel. Now comes the big question, how do we remember this? So to remember this, I want you to look at this picture. Trust me, this weird picture will help you, okay? So this middle part is the female reproductive part. Let's see how this helps me to remember. Bottom, I've drawn an egg. Egg reminds me of the ovary. That's like the easiest part for me to remember. So the egg is the ovary. On top of the egg, there is a tile. This is a tile. Tile rhymes with style. So this is how I remember style. Again, I knew the word style. I just had to remember where does style go, and this tile helps me remember. And then on top of that, what is the symbol? This is the symbol of sigma. Sigma reminds me of stigma. Okay? So if I ever get confused, hey, which is stigma? Oh, this is the stigma. It's sigma, stigma. Okay, and you can see they're balancing on top of each other, and the stigma is about to fall. It's going to fall on the car. Car fall, car fell, carpel. That's carpel for me. So the whole thing is carpel. Okay, let's come to the male part. What have I drawn? Why do I have drawn bulbs? Because I know there's a filament, and filament reminds me of the filament of the bulb, and that's how I remember, this is the filament. And what is it on the top of that filament? I see ants, but not just any ants. I see these beautiful female ants, anther, anther. So again, I know anther, but then the moment I hear anther, if I remember this picture, I know, anthers are over here, the top part of the male reproductive part. And we know what these anthers are saying? The female ants are telling all the male ants, stay there, men, stay there, men. So stamen. And that's pretty much it. Now we remember both the male reproductive part and the female reproductive part. And at first you might be wondering, how do I remember this weird picture? Well, the thing is, weird things are actually easier to remember because that's how our memory works. Our brains tend to hold on to weird information. So take a look at this picture a little bit and then you'll be able to do this. All right. So in fact, let me prove it to you. Now, I want you to pause the video, take a look at this picture and see if you can name all the parts of this flower. Go ahead, give it a try. So could you do it? If you could, awesome. If you couldn't, no worries, you can go back and rewatch the video. The last thing I want you to do is to be able to memorize this picture, right? So what you can do now is take a look at this picture very nicely. Again, pause the video and then close your eyes and see if you can visualize this entire picture. Remember all the things, the egg, the ants, the sigma, the carpel part, and everything. All right? So once you're done with that, you'll be able to label all the parts. If you look at the flowering plants, which are also called angiosperms, then the flower represents the sexual part of that plant. On the other hand, if you look at non-flowering plants, which are also called the gymnosperms, then these cones, they represent their sexual parts. But you know what? Flowers are beautiful. And so in this video, we will look at the different parts of the flower, and we'll focus more on something called unisexual and bisexual flowers and look at some of their examples. So let's get rid of that and focus on the flower. The flower can be broadly divided into 4 parts. this middle part that you find over here, we call it the carpel. You can also call it pistil. Now it turns out that carpel and pistil are not exactly the same. They have some differences, but the difference is only important when we deal with more complicated carpels. But as of now, we can just call them, for such simple flowers, we can just call them the same thing. So you call them carpel or pistil, doesn't matter. But what's important is that the carpel or the pistil, that is the female reproductive part of the flower. So I'm just gonna call this the female reproductive part. I'm just gonna write female reproductive, okay? Now, why do we say that the carpel is the female reproductive part? Because it is the carpel that is responsible in production of egg cells. Carpels make egg cells somewhere over here. And so just like how in animals, the female reproductive part makes the egg cells. So any reproductive part which makes the egg cells is often called the female reproductive part. The next one would be stamen. So these are the stamen. We have 4 stamens in our flower. The stamen, they are the male reproductive parts. So let me write that over here. Oops. All right. So the stamen are the male reproductive part. Any guesses why it's called the male reproductive part? Well, because it is where the sperm cells are made. Sperm cells. Again, just like in animals, the reproductive part that creates the sperm cells, we call them the male reproductive part. And the whole idea behind sexual reproduction is that the sperm cells need to go and fuse with the egg cells. But we'll have to wait for that action. It's going to happen in the future videos. For now, let's only concentrate on the parts of the flower. So we are 2 down, 2 more to go. And yeah, before we proceed, one important thing, whenever I get confused between these names, right, what I do is I remember stamen has the word men in it. And that's how that helps me to remember that stamen is the male reproductive part. Something to help me remember. All right, now let's go to the third one. The third one is probably the easiest one to remember. It's the petals. What do they do? Well, you know, they make the flower attractive. And so the main job is to attract insects like bees and butterflies, even birds. Why? Because as we will see in the future, they play a huge role in the reproduction. You may have heard of this thing called as pollination, right? We'll talk about all of that fun stuff in the future videos. But the petal's job is basically to attract the insects. And finally, that brings us to the fourth part, the sepals. The sepals played an important role in protecting this flower even before it blossomed. You might know that before the flower blossoms, it's a bud, right? And so what's covering that bud? It's the sepals. It's a sepal that protects the things inside from maybe getting eaten or anything. So their main job of the sepal was to protect, let me just write that, was to protect the young flower, I would say. The young bud. Of course, now that the flower has blossomed, its job is done, but nevertheless, it did play an important role in its life. So these are the 4 parts of the flower. And of course, in the future video, we'll dig a little deeper and look at the parts of the carpel and the stamen separately. But what I want to tell you now is that in this particular example, we are seeing that both the female and the male reproductive parts are on the same flower, right? Such flowers are called bisexual flowers. Why? Because they have both the sexes on the same flower, bisexual. But in some cases, we will find they will only contain either the male reproductive part, the stamens, or they will only contain the female reproductive part, the carpels. In such cases, since they contain only one reproductive part, we will call them Uni Sexual Flowers. So let's take some examples. If you look at lilies, then they are bisexual. Why? Because if you look carefully, you can see the carpel, the female reproductive part, and you can see the stamens as well. These are the stamens, the male reproductive part. Both are present, so it's bisexual. Another famous example is hibiscus. If you look carefully, you can see this female reproductive part, the carpel. Of course, the carpel is a little complicated. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carpels fused together. So it's a little complicated, but what's important is that you see the female reproductive part and you also see the stamens over here. These are all the stamens, the male reproductive part. Because both are present, this is a bisexual flower. On the other hand, if you look at papaya flowers, if you look at the top flower, what you're seeing are only the carpels. Of course, there are 5 carpels over here, but only the female reproductive part is present, only one sex. Therefore, this is a unisexual flower. And since only female reproductive parts are present, we will call that as the female flower. On the bottom, we have another papaya flower itself, but this one only contains the stamens, the male reproductive part, and therefore this one will be a unisexual male papaya flower. Now at this point, you might say, that's great, I understand unisexual and bisexual flowers, but here's the problem for exams. In exams, they ask us to list out the flowers which are unisexual and which are bisexual. How do we do that? How do we remember which flowers are unisexual and bisexual? Here's what I do. So whenever I say the word flower, whichever flowers come to your mind, most of the famous flowers that you might know of, like sunflowers, lilies, hibiscus, lotus, daffodils, tulips, roses, marigold, whichever famous flower you can think of, those are all bisexual flowers. That's a clue to remember bisexual flowers, the most famous flowers you can think of. All right. On the other hand, when I talk about big fruits or big vegetables, think big fruits, big vegetables, like papaya or jackfruit or watermelon or pumpkin, bottle gourd. So big vegetables and big fruits, turns out their flowers are usually unisexual. Now, of course, there is no rule like that. This is just a way to remember. For example, if you take mango, which can also be big, right? Turns out mango flowers are bisexual. So don't think of it as a rule. It's just a way to remember unisexual and bisexual flowers, especially for our exams, okay? That's pretty much it. So to quickly summarize, what did we see in this video? We learned the 4 parts of the flower, and then we saw that if both the carpel and the stamen are present on the same flower, both the sexes are present on the same flower, we will call them bisexual flowers. And how do we remember it? Well, the most famous flowers you can think of, they're all bisexual. And if you have only one of the sexes present on the flower, either just the carpels or only the stamens, then we will call them unisexual flowers. And how do we remember it? Remember big fruits and big vegetables. Not all of them, but like papaya, jackfruit, pumpkin, their flowers tend to be unisexual.